On July 10, 1972, under the hot white lights of the Las Vegas Hilton, Elvis Presley walked on stage expecting another sold-out night. But halfway through his set, he froze, because in the front row stood Sammy Davis Jr., looking exhausted but hopeful. What happened next stunned 4,200 people and changed the show forever. The room glowed with a warm red-gold shine, the kind that made every corner feel alive. Mirrors along the walls caught the stage lights and threw them back in soft flashes. Waiters moved quickly between crowded tables, balancing drinks that rattled with melting ice. The air tasted like cigarette haze and perfume drifting together. People whispered, laughed, and shifted in their seats, trying to get the best view before the king walked on. More than 4,200 fans filled the Las Vegas Hilton showroom that night. Some clutched folded ticket stubs. Others held the cheap paper programs sold in the lobby. A few even carried scarves, hoping Elvis might toss one their way. But no matter who they were or where they sat, everyone shared the same electric expectation. Tonight would be unforgettable. Backstage, Elvis adjusted the collar of his white caped suit. He hummed the opening lines of Suspicious Minds under his breath, the notes echoing off the narrow hallway walls. A small table behind him held a single glass of water and a neatly folded towel. Next to it sat a handwritten reminder card he kept with him on show nights. 3 simple words were scribbled across it. Give them heart. Ricky Del Monte, a young stagehand who had worked the Hilton shows all summer, watched Elvis carefully. Ricky had seen hundreds of pre-show rituals, but tonight felt different. Elvis's foot usually tapped nervously before walking out, keeping time with the band. But now he stood strangely still, eyes closed, like he was listening for something faint and far away. Ricky stepped closer. You good tonight, boss? He asked quietly. Elvis didn't answer at first. He opened his eyes slowly, took a long breath, then nodded. Yeah, he said, almost whispering. Just feels heavy out there. Ricky didn't know what that meant, but he didn't push it. He moved aside as the cue came from the sound booth. The band began the warm-up chords. The mic crackled. The crowd erupted into cheers that rolled through the walls like thunder. It was time. Elvis stepped toward the curtain, placed one hand on the velvet edge, and paused. Something tugged at him, a feeling he couldn't name. The kind of feeling you get when someone from your past walks into the present without warning. He brushed it off and stepped into the blinding white spotlight. The roar of the crowd hit him instantly. People stood, clapping, shouting his name. Flashbulbs popped like tiny fireworks. The band pushed into the first bars of the opening number. But as Elvis scanned the front rows, the noise in the room seemed to fade. His eyes locked onto a single figure. Sammy Davis Jr. sitting alone. Not performing, not joking, not surrounded by friends. Just sitting there, small, tired, and strangely fragile under the bright stage lights. Elvis froze mid-step. The crowd didn't notice at first, but a few of the band members did. One missed a beat. Another looked up in confusion. Ricky, watching from the wings, frowned. Something was happening, and everyone could feel the shift. Elvis blinked as if making sure he wasn't imagining things. Sammy lifted his eyes slowly and gave a soft, almost apologetic smile. It wasn't the smile of the superstar the world knew. It was the smile of a man carrying something heavy. A question flickered in Elvis's mind. Why is he here like this? And another followed. What happened to him? What would you have done in that moment if you were Elvis? How would you react if a friend's silent pain suddenly stood right in front of you? Elvis took one slow step forward, and then another. The entire room leaned with him. Something was about to happen. Something no one expected. The spotlight drifted across the crowd like a slow-moving moonbeam, softening every face it touched. But when it stopped on Sammy Davis Jr., something in the room shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, so quiet that even people in the back rows felt a strange pull, as if the air itself had changed shape. Sammy's shoulders were hunched, his posture unlike the sharp, confident man audiences remembered. His suit looked slightly rumpled, like he'd rushed out without caring how he appeared. Even his famous glasses seemed heavier on his face. Elvis tried to focus on the music. The band pushed through the intro, horns bright, drums steady, bass warm and familiar. But the first chord he strummed wobbled. His voice caught in his throat, forming a crack that sliced right through the noise. Fans in the front row exchanged confused glances. A few leaned forward, sensing something unusual. You could hear a single cough from Section C, then nothing. Silence thickened around him like fog. Sammy didn't stand. He didn't wave or smile wide. He simply stared up at Elvis with eyes that looked tired, wounded, and strangely hopeful. There was a quiet message in that look, one only an old friend could understand. Elvis felt it immediately, like a hand gripping his chest. The crowd didn't know the details, but they felt the tension. They felt the weight pressing between the two men. Elvis took a step back from the mic. The mic groaned with a soft feedback squeal. Several fans gasped. Behind him, a band member hit the wrong chord, fingers sliding off the keys. Even the stage lights flickered for half a second, as though unsure of what to highlight next. Something was happening, and everyone sensed it at once. What pain was Sammy carrying? What would you have done if you saw a friend unraveling behind a quiet smile? Sammy had been through a difficult stretch. Fading reviews, long nights, lonely travel, and a personal loss that he never talked about publicly. People only saw the tuxedo, the jokes, the tap shoes. They didn't see the man who sometimes walked into empty dressing rooms and sat alone long after the crowds left. Tonight wasn't part of his schedule. He hadn't been announced. He simply arrived at the Hilton without any entourage, bought a ticket like anyone else, and took a seat close to the stage. A whisper spread through the first few rows. "Is that really him?" someone asked. "Why does he look so down?" another murmured. But no one approached. Even famous people get lonely. Even legends can sit in a packed room and feel entirely alone. Sammy's cane rested by his leg, leaning slightly to one side, as though he lacked the strength to hold it firmly. Elvis's jaw tightened. His left hand trembled. He stepped away from the center, ignoring the fixed choreography that every show depended on. Security exchanged looks, unsure whether to move or stay frozen. This wasn't on any cue sheet. This wasn't part of the plan. Then Elvis did something he almost never did on stage. He stopped singing, and the crowd felt the world tilt. The rhythm stumbled the moment Elvis stepped away from the mic. The guitarist hesitated, unsure whether to continue or fade out. The drummer softened his tempo, waiting for some kind of sign. Even the brass section paused mid-breath. It felt like the entire stage was holding itself together with a thin thread, afraid to snap it. The spotlight followed Elvis as he walked toward the front edge, ignoring the choreography that kept every show tight and polished. Fans leaned forward. Seats creaked softly. A strange hush fell over the showroom, the kind that makes every whisper sound louder than it should. A woman in row 4 clutched her pearls. A man in the back lowered his drink without realizing it. The waiters froze between tables, unsure whether to move or stay still. Something unusual was unfolding, and the room sensed it instantly. Elvis stared directly at Sammy. His voice, usually strong and warm, dropped into something softer, almost trembling. "My brother," he said, the words flowing out before he could stop them. The mic picked up only part of the phrase, letting it echo faintly through the speakers. The crowd reacted with a ripple of gasps. They understood immediately. This wasn't a performer greeting another celebrity. This was a friend speaking to someone he cared about deeply. Near the back, a young woman named Linda Marks fumbled with a small cassette recorder she had hidden in her purse. She had bought the cheap device earlier that afternoon, hoping to catch a song or two. She had no idea she was capturing a moment that would survive for decades. The tape hissed softly as the recorder began to spin. You could almost hear her shaky breathing on the tape as she lifted the microphone toward the sound. Sammy shifted in his seat. He tried to stand but struggled. His cane wobbled, tapping lightly against the floor. Elvis stepped down from the stage's edge until his boots hung just above the drop. Security guards exchanged urgent looks. Their instructions were always clear. No unscripted contact. No sudden movements. No breaking the invisible wall between performer and audience. But Elvis raised his hand firmly, signaling them to stay back. The crowd watched, hearts pounding. It felt like the entire room inhaled at the same time. Even the air seemed still, waiting, listening. What pain was Sammy carrying? Why did Elvis look so determined? And if a legend could stop an entire show for one friend, what would you do for someone who needed you? Elvis took another step, his boot now inches from the edge. The lights above him hummed. The band members exchanged confused glances. Every second stretched into something longer, heavier, more meaningful. You could hear a chair shift in the balcony. A fork clinked lightly against a plate. These tiny sounds became sharp in the silence. Sammy tried to rise again. His hand gripped the cane. His legs trembled. He tilted forward slightly, as though his body couldn't decide whether to sit or stand. Elvis's eyes softened with worry. The same way a person looks at someone they've known for years and recognize instantly when something is wrong. What would you do if you saw a friend fighting a battle they couldn't name? What matters more in life? The show or the people we love? Elvis made his choice. He bent his knees. He leaned forward. And then he jumped from the stage. He didn't slide down or step carefully. He jumped straight into the open space between him and the front row. Security lunged forward, but Elvis waved them off again, insisting quietly without words that everything was fine. The crowd exploded with gasps and murmurs. People stood. People pointed. People whispered. Did he really just do that? Elvis landed hard but steady. The floor shook slightly under the impact. The spotlight jerked downward to follow him. Cameras flashed. The crowd roared, then fell silent again, waiting to see what he would do next. And Sammy slowly lifted his trembling hand. Something huge was about to happen. Elvis steadied himself after the jump, one hand briefly touching the floor to catch his balance. The crowd let out a wave of gasps, some sharp, some trembling, as if no one could believe what they had just seen. Security hesitated in a loose semicircle, unsure whether to intervene or freeze. They knew the rules, but they also knew Elvis rarely broke them. And when he did, there was always a reason. Sammy tried to push himself up again. His fingers curled around the cane, knuckles whitening with effort. His legs shook. His breath shook. Even the cane shook. The spotlight above flickered slightly as he leaned forward, almost tipping out of his seat. Elvis took 2 quick steps, closing the distance between them with a seriousness that felt almost holy. The crowd fell completely silent, as if someone had pulled the sound from the room. Then Elvis reached him, and Sammy collapsed gently into his arms. The hug happened instantly. No hesitation, no careful adjustment, no thought about the cameras or the audience. Elvis wrapped both arms around Sammy with a force that felt protective and fragile at the same time. Sammy buried his face against Elvis's shoulder, his breath trembling. His glasses pressed awkwardly against Elvis's collar. His cane slipped from his hand and clattered on the floor. Gasps rippled like soft waves across the showroom. Some fans raised their hands to their mouths. Others felt tears well before they understood why. A woman near the stage whispered, "Oh my God!" The man beside her squeezed her hand. Even the waiters stopped carrying trays. The band, still standing on stage, lowered their instruments slowly, creating a settling hush that made the moment feel even larger. For a few seconds, nothing else existed. Just 2 legends, 2 men, 2 friends, holding onto each other like the world around them had disappeared. A fan named Joan Hargreaves, sitting only 3 seats away, later wrote in her diary, "It was like the whole room exhaled its sadness all at once." Her words captured something true, something the crowd felt but couldn't quite name. This wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a performance. It was raw humanity in the middle of a perfect, polished show. Elvis leaned close to Sammy's ear. He whispered something quiet, something only the 2 of them could hear. Sammy's shoulders shook once, then again, as if the words pierced straight through the wall he had been holding up for months. Elvis kept holding him, grounding him, steadying him. Their silhouettes blended under the soft wash of the stage lights, forming a picture that would be remembered for decades. Fans reached for cameras. Flashbulbs burst like tiny stars around them. One photograph captured the moment with perfect timing. Sammy's head lowered, Elvis's arm firm around his back, and the blurred glow of the spotlight behind them. The photographer, Harold Kimball, didn't know then that the image would become iconic. Sammy pulled back slightly, tears catching the light. Elvis kept one arm around him, refusing to let him fall. Sammy opened his mouth as if struggling to form words. The crowd leaned forward again, breaths held. Something vulnerable lived in Sammy's expression. Something pleading, something aching. He whispered a request. Quiet, shaky, painful, hopeful. Elvis listened without blinking. His face softened, his eyes steadying on Sammy's like he was witnessing something sacred. The audience couldn't hear the words, but they felt the weight of them. Something heavy, something personal, something a man only asks a friend when he can't carry everything alone anymore. Elvis nodded. A slow, gentle nod that made the entire room tighten with anticipation. What did Sammy ask? Why did Elvis agree without a second thought? And what would unfold next between two legends standing at the edge of their breaking points? Whatever it was, everyone knew one thing. The night had just shifted again. Elvis held Sammy steady as the crowd settled into an aching silence. People leaned so far forward in their seats it looked like the entire front row might spill onto the floor. Sammy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his breath still unsteady. The lights softened above them, dimming into a warm glow that made the entire room feel smaller, more intimate, as though everyone had been pulled into the same emotional circle. Sammy whispered again, this time a little clearer. Sing, that one, he murmured. Elvis didn't need him to say the full title. He already knew. He felt it in his chest the same way you feel a memory before you fully recall it. Sammy was asking for a song he usually kept for rare nights. A song tied to pain, hope, and everything in between. If I Can Dream. Elvis looked up toward the stage. The band members exchanged glances, unsure whether to resume the planned setlist or wait for instruction. For a moment, time hovered in place. Then Elvis lifted a hand, signaling a complete shift. The band straightened, preparing for a song they hadn't expected to play. A musician in the back wiped his palms on his pants. Another quietly adjusted the sheet music. The entire showroom felt the shift, the quiet thrill of rules bending. Sammy sank slowly back into his seat, exhausted but calmer, as if the simple act of asking had released some hidden weight. Elvis stepped back toward the stage. The lights followed him, creating a soft halo around his silhouette. The audience watched with reverent stillness. Even the clink of glass had vanished. A rare quiet settled across the room, almost sacred. Elvis climbed the steps one at a time. Slow, measured, purposeful. He reached the mic, rested his hand gently against it, and looked out across the sea of faces. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just breathed out a long, trembling exhale. The first note emerged low, fragile, and painfully honest. A hush swept the room like a closing curtain. Sammy's eyes softened, blinking slowly as if each lyric pressed directly into him. People in the crowd began to tear up almost instantly. A woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin. A man beside her kept his hand on his chest, feeling something he hadn't expected to feel that night. Elvis sang like he wasn't performing for thousands but for one person. The spotlight tightened, focusing on him alone, leaving the rest of the showroom in a dim glow. The band played gently behind him, careful not to overpower the delicate emotion in his voice. Every note carried weight. Every pause felt intentional. Every lyric seemed to reach toward Sammy, not the crowd. Have you ever heard a song feel like a hand on your shoulder? Have you ever watched music heal someone right in front of you? As the chorus swelled, the entire room inhaled together. The last verse floated out, trembling slightly, almost breaking. It wasn't perfect. It was real. And when the final note faded, fading into a fragile echo, something happened no one could have predicted. The audience didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They sat frozen, overwhelmed, waiting for whatever came next. Because they knew the night wasn't over. Not yet. The final note drifted through the air like smoke, hanging above the crowd long after the music stopped. Elvis lowered his head, breath trembling from the weight of what he had just poured out. No one moved. No one dared speak. It felt like the entire room had been suspended in the same silent heartbeat. Then, slowly, a soft gasp rippled through the audience as people realized they had witnessed something they might never see again. Sammy wiped his eyes with shaky hands. His shoulders rose and fell with uneven breaths. The song had cracked something open inside him, something he'd kept hidden behind jokes and bright lights for far too long. Elvis saw it from the stage. He felt it, and he let the quiet linger for a moment longer, giving Sammy space to breathe again. Then the applause hit. Not sudden, not loud, but rising like a wave. A gentle swell of admiration and gratitude that grew stronger by the second. People stood up row by row, creating an almost trembling ripple of movement across the showroom. Some cried openly. Others clapped with slow reverence, like they were honoring something sacred. A woman near the back whispered, "I've never heard him sing like that." A man beside her nodded, speechless. Newspapers the next morning would describe it as the most human moment of Elvis's Vegas years. But in this moment, no headline existed. No reporter knew what was unfolding. It was just two legends and thousands of strangers caught inside a shared emotion they couldn't fully explain. Elvis stepped back from the mic. The spotlight softened. He walked down the stage stairs again, slower this time, almost cautiously, as though the floor itself carried fragile meaning. He approached Sammy, who rose with visible effort. The two men stood close, breathing the same stunned air. Elvis placed a hand on Sammy's shoulder, steadying him gently. Sammy tried to speak. Words formed, then dissolved. He touched his chest lightly, as if trying to calm something inside. Elvis nodded, as though he understood without needing the explanation. Sometimes friends don't need full sentences. Sometimes pain speaks for itself. The crowd watched silently. Finally Sammy whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." His voice cracked in the middle, thin from emotion. Elvis squeezed his shoulder once more, grounding him. What does it mean to be seen at your weakest? And how often do we walk past people who are silently breaking? Sammy straightened slightly, reclaiming a bit of the strength that had been slipping from him for months. He reached for his cane and lifted it carefully. A soft glow touched his face as camera flashes popped again, capturing the moment in tiny bursts of silver light. One of those flashes came from Harold Kimball, a quiet photographer who attended shows whenever he could afford a ticket. Later, his photograph, slightly blurred, filled with raw emotion, would become one of the most shared images among fans. The hug, the tears, the tenderness, all frozen in time. Elvis returned to the stage, but the show didn't resume immediately. The band waited for a cue, unsure whether the night was still following any script at all. Elvis took a breath and looked out over the audience. "Sometimes," he said softly, "a song isn't just a song." Decades later, Sammy's family would reveal a handwritten note Elvis sent the next morning. It sat framed in Sammy's home until the day he died. One line in particular stood out, "You're not alone. Not tonight." That message resonated across generations. Because the moment didn't end at the Hilton. Its ripple carried far beyond that night. And yet, the real meaning of it had one more turn left. A turn no one expected. The showroom slowly returned to life, but nothing felt the same. People looked at each other with red eyes and soft smiles, as if they had all been part of one shared secret. The lights warmed gently above the stage, glowing like quiet embers instead of bright spotlights. Even the air felt different, lighter, calmer, almost peaceful. Elvis stood in the center, hands resting loosely on the microphone, breathing out slowly as the room finally settled into silence again. He didn't speak right away. He let the audience feel the stillness. He let them absorb the weight of what had happened. When he finally lifted his head, he looked older in the best way. Not tired, but wiser, softened by something deeper than performance. Sometimes, he began quietly, we forget that even the strongest among us carry storms you can't see. People listened without moving. No clinks of glasses. No whispers. No shifting chairs. Just attention, full and pure. Elvis continued, his voice gentle. Tonight wasn't about a show. It wasn't about applause. It was about being human. And seeing someone who needed to be held for a moment. His words wrapped around the crowd like warm fabric. Sammy sat watching him, eyes shining, shoulders finally eased. A thought pulsed through the room. When was the last time any of them had stopped to truly see someone else? And when had they last let someone see them? Elvis's gaze swept across the crowd. You may never stand on a stage, he said softly, but you will stand in front of someone who needs kindness. And in that moment, what you choose will matter more than you know. A quiet murmur of emotion rolled through the balcony. A woman dabbed her eyes. A man squeezed his son's shoulder gently. People felt the message press into them like a hand resting over the heart. Elvis lowered the mic. His final words came out like a whisper shared with the whole room. In the end, we're remembered not for the songs we sang, but for the hearts we held. The crowd didn't cheer. They rose slowly, reverently, offering the kind of standing ovation built from understanding, not excitement. A moment of compassion had become a story that would outlive both men. And everyone there that night knew it. If this moment touched you, share this story with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters. Tell a friend, a parent, or anyone carrying a quiet weight. And if you've ever witnessed a night like this, drop your memory below. Your story might help someone feel less alone today.